Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Erin Connors, Communications Director for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from around the world. The Fowler is honored to present today's program, Curator's Choice, Gold Weights from West Africa. First, Fowler staff will offer a behind-the-scenes look at the ongoing research and conservation of gold weights from West Africa that are currently on view in our exhibition, Particular Histories, Provenance Research in African Arts. Then we'll follow several objects to the lab, where staff will discuss their investigations and findings. Carly S. Forbes is the Mellon Curatorial Fellow at the Fowler, where she researches African objects donated by the Wellcome Trust to the museum in 1965. Forbes received her PhD in art history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's worked with the Ackland Art Museum, the North Carolina Museum of Art, and the Samuel P. Harn Museum of Art. Her research focuses on art produced during the colonial period in the Democratic Republic of Congo, museum and collecting histories, and issues of provenance. Erica P. Jones is Curator of African Arts at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. She received her PhD in art history at UCLA, specializing in African art. Since joining the Fowler in 2015, Jones has organized multiple exhibitions, among them Pantsulah for Life, Moleko Magozi, Bread, Butter, and Power, on display in the Walled City, the Nigerian Pavilion at the British Empire Exhibition, and was co-curator of Photo Cameroon, Studio Portraiture 1970s to 1990s. Her publishing has been focused on the arts and museums of the Grassfields, and she is the author of the book accompanying the exhibition, Bread, Butter, and Power. I have just a few quick technical bits of housekeeping before we begin. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click View Options and then go to side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. If you have any questions during our program, please submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You could submit entries that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. All right, that's all from me. Over to you, Carly and Erica.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Wait for Carly. There we go.
Sorry, it wouldn't let me open. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. For today's program, we'll be looking at a group of objects from Particular Histories, as Erin said, now on view at the Fowler until November 13th. This exhibition considers the provenance or histories of ownership of several works drawn from the gift of 30,000 works that the Fowler received in 1965 from the Wellcome Trust. In looking at provenance, we can learn more about the creation, use, movement, and reinterpretation of African material in the early 20th century. And in addition to being about provenance, this exhibition is also about research process, sharing with you, the public, some of the research we've been conducting as part of a Mellon-funded grant since summer of 2019. To help show some of this research, the material that we'll focus on today are weights used to measure gold. Now, they are quite small. As you can see on the photo here, we have a case that includes about 16, and it's all very close together. So we encourage you to come and look very closely at them in person. But the goal of the presentation today is to share a little bit more about our research and also to provide a look into the work that goes on for the storage and care of these works.
So, the big question is, what exactly is a gold weight? While the name might imply that these are weights made of gold, which is a question we get all the time, they're actually copper alloy weights that were used to measure gold. So this is, a little bit of a mouthful if we want to say that every single time. So we tend to leave out the copper alloy part and just colloquially call these gold weights. But as you will see later in the program, actually, the copper alloy aspect of these weights has been actually the main focus of our research on these very small works of art. You can see on the screen that these weights come in a large variation of shapes, colors, and sizes. Some of them are figurative, like some of the ones you see here in the shape of a bird. There's one that's shaped like a beetle right next to it, and then next to that one, moving from left to right here, is in the form of a cannon, actually. And then there are also these geometric uniform weights. You'll see them, more towards the middle and the right, definitely on the far right in the lower image. And these tend to be decorated with really wonderful abstract designs.
Great. So now that we kind of understand a little bit more about the materiality and the different shapes and sizes of these works, we also want to situate ourselves geographically. Well, we're today in the area that's the nation state of Ghana, but in the late 19th century until 1957, this area was the British colony called the Gold Coast. And the Gold Coast area is home to Akan-speaking communities that have a really long history and vibrant brass casting culture. From the 15th to the late 19th century in this area, gold was the primary currency used in this area, and gold weights were an integral tool in local financial exchanges. So you can see here on the bottom part of the screen, there's a lot of other equipment that's used in this gold trade. So we've got boxes that are used to store gold dust, scales that are for weighing it. So you can see here the measurement scale on the bottom where you would have placed the weight on one side and had the gold dust on the other until it evened out. We also have scoops, and then, of course, the weights for measuring the dust themselves. So we'll see a lot more of these later in storage.
So in the late 19th century, however, we've just, Carly's just talked about how these are used for measuring gold. In an attempt to gain further control over the region, the British colonial government shifted the colony's currency from gold to the British pound sterling. And so with the decline of gold as legal tender, it's not like overnight it just disappeared, but there was sort of a gradual decline. These weights that were omnipresent to a certain degree, they became obsolete in the gold trade, and all of a sudden they gained popularity as souvenirs. It was a very sort of easy transition in that way. So, European merchants, their soldiers, diplomats, among others, they all returned to Europe with, Ghanaian goods as something that they collected during their travels, whatever the reason for those travels may have been. And among these goods, these included vast numbers of weights, so many weights. And some of those weights were formerly used as actually part of, the currency exchange. And some were weights that were just made for tourists. This important economic shift is something that seemingly is not taken into account in other analyses of gold weights, something that we've noticed in our research. So much of the past scholarship attempts to reconstruct the measurement systems to understand the amount that each weight represents in terms of that weight, how much gold it represents. And the effort is mostly connected to the geometric weights that you see at the top here, which are assumed to have been used in the process of weighing gold. And thus, obviously, if they were used for weighing gold, they needed to adhere to a proposed standard. And that's what a lot of studies have tried to figure out. Sort of the other side of this assumption, if the geometric ones are used for weighing gold, the other side is that the figurative weights were not functional in this way. And so they could be freer in their mass. It was not as constrained. So what's sort of asserted is that instead of being used to measure gold, the figurative weights were instead intended to represent proverbs. And these proverbs were part of the process, part of the conversation that was part and parcel of the buying and selling process. So, they still had a role, it just wasn't in that measurement system. So with these studies that we've looked at, here they are basing their study groups on this assumption that geometric weights were the only ones used for measuring gold. And so these studies that have attempted to reconstruct the weights and measurement systems, they're using this limited sample group. So Carly's going to speak more to that.
Yeah, to help show that some of the geometric weights were once used in a codified measuring system, this size equals this much gold dust, this size equals another. We have many examples in the collection that include reductions. Like here you can see it almost seems like the edge of the weight has been sheared off, or additions, which are generally in lead, but you can see them added here in like a globule or within the cavity that's there. So in reducing or adding to the weight, we assume that those weights then were made so that they could adhere to a certain measuring standard. However, when we look at the weights themselves, we also note that several of the figurative weights, these ones that weren't supposed to be used in financial transactions, also have additions and other kinds of modifications. So we're then complicating our view. Are the figurative weights used? Are they purely representative of proverbs? And this leads to just really a lot of questions about the scholarship that we're seeing. If the figurative ones were actually used in weighing golds, or if they weren't used, rather, then why do these figurative examples have additional material? So it's a question that we're playing with about question of use and of size within the gold weights.
So, our research really started by looking at the objects, but, in addition to the material evidence that helps us question the use of the objects, we must also consider the historical context in which they were produced. So many of the weights in the collection today date from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And, as we've already mentioned, this is a time when the British enforced the pound sterling for the official unit of trade. So this is a moment, this entire collection that we're working with represents this moment of a drastic shift in the economic systems in the area. So additionally, during this time, as this shift is occurring, there's also more and more Europeans who are coming to work and to travel in Ghana. And so with their small portable nature, gold weights are this ideal souvenir for these Europeans to collect as a way to commemorate their time there. One of the great aspects of working with the Fowler's gift from the Wellcome Trust is that in addition to the physical objects, the trust also provided archival material that traces some of the provenance histories of these works. And so here we've given you a selection of three examples of the provenance research of we call these flimsy cards, and we have so many other programs where we talk about these flimsy cards. It's all over the place. But these are the records that give us the background to when Sir Henry Wellcome collected these, some information about what the object is, information regarding how they were keeping track of them in their collection. But what we see in these cards here, that we have these two cards in this one log record, is in the top left, we have, for example, that the record indicates that multiple weights that were collected in Ghana were collected by a private donor, E.M. Patterson. And you see his name right there. This is on the card. We also have his address. He's no longer there. This was quite some time ago. We also then in the card to the right, we see another example. This is a record indicating a weight that was purchased at an auction, and the ST that we see, thank you, Carly. This indicates that it was purchased from Stevens Auctions Rooms on November 16th in 1920. So we know, and this was lot 159. So it's really, this is incredible records for tracing exactly how these weights, at least once they were in Europe or came to Europe, made it into Sir Henry Wellcome's collection. Finally, at the bottom, we have some entries from a log that indicate a series of weights that were collected by an officer in the West India Regiment that was stationed at the Cape Coast Castle. And we know that these were at least collected by Wellcome. Wellcome received them in 1904. So that gives us a good sense of who was doing the collecting and when. We can look at examples of each of these early collectors, their biographies, and possible dates of collection to lend particular histories to these works. So for example, we know that C.S. Patterson, we had already mentioned E.M. Patterson. So the weights that were sold to Wellcome, were given to Wellcome by E.M. Patterson, were actually collected by his father, C.S. Patterson, who was a British doctor working in Ghana, working with the train system. As they were building the trains, and we know that Patterson left Ghana prior to 1903. So we know that any of the weights that were in his collection had to be in his collection prior to 1903 if he collected them there. So such specificity lends our investigation about these weights, when they were made, if they were actually used to weigh gold, and what their movements tell us about collecting practices in the early 20th century. I mean, time information is sort of invaluable.
Yeah, it is. And I think we'll see throughout our video that we can combine this material and visual and analyses and archives to really try to create a fuller, different picture of gold weights than you might have seen in the past. So now that we've provided a brief introduction to our research on the gold weights in the Fowler's collection, we'll share a brief pre-recorded look into the gold weights in our storerooms. We hope you enjoy this glimpse into the behind the scenes area of the museum. We wish we could invite you all, but space and time. And once the pre-recorded portion is over, we look forward to coming back on and answering any questions you might have. Enjoy.
So here we are at the section where we store the gold weights, and it used to be, prior to starting this project, all of these drawers, and then our absolutely fantastic collections assistant for the project has actually restored a whole bunch, that's the wrong one, of the welcome weights into these really fantastic boxes. So what she's done, instead of having them kind of all strewn about the drawer in which they were organized by number, she's created these boxes that have these folds, and they're all sorted chronologically by the accession number. And so one of the things we work with quite frequently with all museum objects is that they're assigned a unique identifier. So at the Fowler, we start all of our unique identifiers with an X. Then the next number is the year of acquisition, in this case 1965, and then the number within that gift. And so this is 9,322. It's a cute little sawfish there.
Yeah,
So
I got it.
we store them in the backs because, as you can see, it's a lot easier to move through the objects. And with metal objects, you want to be really careful handling them with your bare hands because of the transfer of oil can easily transmit fingerprints or other markings on it. But you can see on this piece of ochre, there is the unique identifier also painted onto the object so that we can easily find it and store it. I don't think this one has any. Sir Henry Wellcome also had his own numbers, but I don't see any on this one. But we just have the Fowler number right there.
Looking for those numbers again.
Yeah.
Such a
So we
handy
have
way to store it.
these boxes for the main gift from the 1960s, from the Wellcome Trust, and then we get to maybe the other avenues of storage for these works are all just this drawer.
Pull out the big drawer.
So you can see we have a few gold weights here. Erica, what do we do here? So these are also all sorted by accession number, by those unique identifiers, but rather than having the boxes, because that would take the entire row that we're in here, they've been counted and stored in these bags. This one is maybe a little less organized, but they're roughly in chronological order. You can still see that the unique identifier is on the baggie as well as on the weight there, and they're grouped in about 25. Yeah. Oh, it says it right there on the bag. Oh, how nice. Groups of 25 that help us to sort and look at them as whole groups. So this is an accession group from the 1990s, 1991 to be exact.
And all of these are photographed and we can see them in our database. So we know which ones if we know what we're looking for, we can look it up in the database, say, okay, it's the small pyramid one, it's in this 91.49 range, and find it within the bag pretty easily. Mm-hmm. So this system seems to be working really well for us right now. It's been a big transition.
Yes. Getting them at least all in number organized bags was a huge task.
So part of the process of weighing gold, it required a whole set of paraphernalia. You would have your scales, you would have a spoon, and you would have a container for the gold. And so within our collection of gold weights at the Fowler, we also have some examples of these other pieces that went along with the process. So here we have an example of a spoon that someone would have kept with their whole collection of gold weights and scales to measure out the gold before putting it onto the scales.
Mm-hmm. And here we have a container that was used to store the gold, so you can see the cap comes off. And it has all of these great images of turn of the century transportation, kind of melding of systems here. So we've got the steam train, we've got some ships, another train. Well, I can't tell what this is. Boats, maybe more continuing and separated by these columns. So these are really architecturally interesting. There's the fort, the colonial fort. Interesting signs of the time, as well as an important tool that was used in the gold trade.
And it seems that these were mass produced, because we have a couple of these in our collection that have come in over the years. And so, it seems that they were rather common items. Maybe these were also exclusively made for the tourist trade. I don't actually know.
Mm-hmm. So how about we head back to our table and we check out some of the research we've been doing with these gold weights.
Sounds good. After you.
Thank you.
So one of our main research questions as we were looking at these was, the idea of, everyone talks about how these were used to weigh gold. And there is a sense that there is a weigh and measure system here, but it's very hard to place the actual gold weights within that measurement system. And so what we've been trying to do is trying to get a sense of where these gold weights would fit within that kind of measurement system. And one thing we've been taking into account is, as we mentioned, there was this huge souvenir trade. And a part of that souvenir trade was that all of a sudden, it's not as if production of gold weights stopped as soon as the pound sterling comes into use. And so all of a sudden, you have an entire trade in gold weights that is no longer beholden to an actual system of weighing gold. And so we've been looking at past research and saying, okay, well, how much is that taken into account when people come up with their systems of weighing and then sort of portioning out their gold weights into those systems. And so we've been approaching that through many different avenues. We've been looking at the history of collection, when they were collected and when they left Ghana. We've been looking at metallic content. We've been looking at weight.
We've been looking at the size and the shape overall. And thinking about maybe if mass or weight changed over time. We see some gold weights even collected in the 80s that are quite large and almost certainly were never used to weigh gold.
We're finding that there is a lot of variation within the alloys used to cast these works. Most often, we see gold weights identified as brass, which is a specific copper alloy of copper and zinc. However, lots of other elements can be combined with copper to make other alloys. We also see some that, in addition to the copper and zinc, have a high level of lead. Still more that have tin along with the copper, zinc, and lead. Others leave out the lead but include copper, zinc, and tin. While all the weights have copper and zinc, we're hoping that this variation in lead, tin, and other trace elements like nickel, silver, and antimony can tell us more about these weights.
Our conservator can't be with us here today, but she actually performed a kind of non-invasive surface level analysis on these weights that detected all of the different metallic compositions of the weight. So we know exactly what percentage is copper, exactly what percentage is zinc, lead, all these other nickel, all these other elements that would have been added to the metals in order to make this copper alloy for the weight. And so we see that manifests all sorts of different ways in the weights, and we're trying to analyze that data to see if it can tell us anything significant about the use or the dating of the weights. But we can also see it really visually through the weights themselves. There are a lot of different colors. Some are quite silvery, some are quite yellow. This one actually has a nice red hue to the outside, and we're not quite sure if that's something that added from the beginning, from the casting or from the metallic composition, or is it something that accumulated over time? So we have a range of colors, we've got a range of sizes, we've also got lots and lots of different motifs that we analyzed over time. Not sure what that data is going to do for us yet, but we have a lot of figurative weights like we have here. We've got a game board, we've got some birds, we've got a sandal pair, and also a whole range of geometric weights that are triangular, rectangular, circular, square.
One thing that we are paying close attention to when we look at the weights also are any modifications that we see to these weights. And so we brought out some examples here that we wanted to highlight that show the two types of modifications that we find. A great example here and here where you have
additional metal that was put onto the weight after it was cast. And so here you can see that the original weight would have been this sort of 4-quadrant piece, and then they've added in the metal to one of the quadrants to make it a little bit heavier. So clearly this wasn't quite heavy enough for whatever value it was meant to connect to. This one right here, we can see was actually probably too heavy, because there is this wonderful clear slice along one of the edges where they were sort of the maker or someone afterwards, we really don't know, was sort of lopping off a part to bring the weight down to then again conform to the system.
And so when we sort of put all this data together, we're able to plot out some graphs, again thanks to our conservation fellow who has spent, an
enormous amount of time on
days of her life, weeks of her life doing this, where we can actually look at sort of where the metallic content and the date and the weight all fall within diagrams to potentially indicate whether certain types of metallic contents were favored at an earlier point in time, others may be favored later when the souvenir trade really takes off, to hopefully get a sense of, okay, we can exclude or include certain groups of weights from our system, of looking at their weight and what that could possibly sort of line up to as a financial system. Yeah.
So that research is still ongoing, but that's really one of the glorious things about working on this project, is that we get to share with you, the public, as things are evolving and changing, and when we come to new conclusions, maybe when we might, maybe someday actually reach the end to this, we hope. But we invite you to come to the exhibition and to see the phenomenal gold weights that are on display, as well as check out our online story map, and you can learn all about, you can see those graphs, you can see the equipment that we use, you can see a whole lot more examples and learn more about the collectors as well. So we hope that you enjoyed this foray into collections with us, and we will see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
That was a quick little behind the scenes glimpse into our storage here at the Fowler, to look at some of the gold weights. We have some time for questions, so I think I'm actually going to start us off. Harriet Michael has written in to ask, were there any secondary sales among collectors? Many collectors know others, and I can imagine the scene, like trading baseball cards to get the objects that you want. No, that's a great question. Carly, do you want to start off with that?
Sure, that's a great question. So yes, the answer is yes. One of the archive cards that we looked at was a Stevens auction, and that was a set of 20. But when you look at that auction catalog, the lots around it, there's like several lots of many different weights. And so that's like one example of these being sold as a group. But we also have distinct cases in the welcome group of objects being like traded over time. So one of the examples that we showed on the very last slide with all the different collectors said that there was, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was some birds that were collected by William Rowland Chemist Betty and his wife Alice Melville, and that group of objects was collected before 1911. We know that family traveled to Ghana in 1911, but then later they actually gave the weights to this other woman, Rachel Davies, for caring for their daughter while she was on school holidays, and then it's actually Rachel who gave them to Sir Henry Wellcome. And so we see this chain of ownership. I'm not exactly sure if we're trading them like baseball cards, like, oh, Erica's got a snake, I need a snake, I'm going to trade her my 4 birds. But there was a lot of movement on these, which is why these are really, really intriguing objects to study, because they are so portable and they could have changed hands so many times. And trying to find the records of those and why people were collecting some but not collecting others. And that just leads me to an incredibly interesting tidbit about why people would have been moving these. We didn't have time to fit it in, but we have these great letters from Wellcome And he's saying, oh man, he's talking to one of his collection people. He's like saying, we got to get more of those gold weights because I want to use them in my advertising. I want to copy the designs that they have. I think they'd make great advertising tools. So we got to go buy some more of them so that we can see the different designs that are on these weights. So talk about a different reason for wanting to collect them, but it's just such a little insight into how Wellcome was seeing the objects in his collection function in many different ways.
And leave it to Sir Henry Wellcome to be the one person who was like, everyone likes the figurative ones, but I'm interested in the geometric ones. You know, it's just anything to have him collect more and more seemed to be what was happening there. So we have a few other questions. Christine Brown has asked if the Fowler has published a catalog of the collection of gold weights, and we haven't yet, we could say. I mean, we are working on publications around this research, but that is all forthcoming, and I think that those will likely have, you know, a good selection. But I would be surprised if we would ever publish all. I think I said 499. I think it was actually 459 Wellcome ones, but then it's over 1,000 in the collection just from various sources over the years. And I would also say to that end, you know, when it comes to gold weights in museum collections, I think you would be hard pressed to find a museum with an African arts collection that doesn't have an extensive collection of gold weights as a part of that. They are so ubiquitous that they seem to be everywhere.
We've got a question here, Erica, that's on the conservation side. This is from Sarah. How does the machine work that tests the metal content? And I think that was a really fascinating thing to learn about. The machine is called portable X-ray fluorescence. And the way I understand it, thanks to our explanations from our collections folks, is that this machine will analyze the exterior elements that are non-organic elements that are present on the exterior of an object. And so what happens was this machine, it's portable, like it says, and we'd have it stand upright, and then you place the gold weight on top, and then it emits an X-ray from the bottom that when it hits the surface of that gold weight, the X-rays will then bounce back into the machine, and the frequency through which it bounces back, it's able to record the different elemental compositions of that weight. So we know that this one is 60% copper, 0.5% lead, zinc, all the other elements. And you can get this whole range of elements that are detected. And that's what we're trying to analyze to understand if we can use the metallic compositions to better understand the weighing system or the dates or the place of manufacture of those works. So it's a pretty cool machine. It is just incredibly tedious. On each weight, you're doing that X-ray analysis 3 different times and then averaging them together. So it's not necessarily a super time consuming process to shoot the X-rays at once, but to do it 3 times and then times over 1,000 weights, that's a heavy time commitment. And we will be forever providing our gratitude to Kate and Marcy for doing that analysis and providing us the data that we needed.
So Perry Clem has asked a question that if the figurative weights were not used as weights and geometric were, can you comment on the decoration on the geometric weights? What did the patterning communicate? Was the decoration connected to weighing, numbers, or categories?
Doc, I'm trying to remember here all the different weight book that we have. I know it's The Universe of the Akan is the title of the book, and it's in French, and that is a really wonderful 3-volume compendium of lots and lots and lots of gold weights that includes all the different geometric patterns and their variations, as well as it kind of builds off what Timothy Garrard did in the 80s to understand, you know, these ones with bar decorations or the ones with the swirls he's saying are the earliest. But that book, The Universe of the Akan, really goes into the different geometric patterns. But I don't think, nothing that I've read either from Ghanaian scholars or from non-Ghanaian scholars is interpreting the geometric decoration. So something it's something that a lot of people have tried to understand is the figurative proverbs, and looking at the patterning has been more interesting for us because we've been trying to understand if the patterns change over time. If we have, like the very earliest collected ones have this set of patterns and the later collected ones look different in a certain way. So we're using the patterns lesson as an interpretive framework and more for the other kinds of questions that we have about materials, techniques, and dates. I know that's not really answering your question, Perry, but we're trying.
It's a process.
Yes.
Adatola Abatan was asking, and Carly, you just mentioned this very briefly, asked if there are Ghanaian scholars who are studying these weights who could provide additional context. And then they also went on to secondly ask if the alloy materials impact mass, how does the museum standardize between the different types of weights? So 2 excellent questions on different themes there.
Yeah, so there are Ghanaian scholars who have looked at this, and we've been quite a few master's theses about the interpretation of the proverbs, and one really interesting one that's on proverbs in like late 20th century communities, just how they're seeing the gold weights continue in that community forum. So yes, there are sources out there. But in terms of, I'm trying to understand the second question, the alloy materials impact weight. How does the museum standardize between different types of weights? Different types of weights in terms of, you think in terms of the shape or in terms of?
I think in terms of the weight itself, how are I was sort of interpreting that as how are these different metallic, how are these different alloy compositions impacting the various weights of metal, I think, of the weights in the end.
Yeah, we're trying to, I wish I had one to pull up, understand the variation among the mass as well as the material composition. So what we're doing is we're taking those material compositions given by the XRF machine, and we're placing that in conversation with all the different recorded variations, or I don't want to call them elements because I'm not talking about the metallic elements, but like the aspects of the weight, to see if there are any kinds of patterns that we can point out. So, are the ones that are 12.2 to 12.7 grams, if that's a specific metallic composition or shape or size or color or design, if that's something that we can call a distinct group. But really, we're looking for anything that makes a distinct group. And so far, we haven't found anything. The metallic composition is just too variable, but that work is still ongoing, especially in comparing them to the dates that we have for them, or the proposed dates that we have for them. But in terms of standardizing it in our database, they're all just called gold weights. And the giant turtle is right there along the teeny tiny gold weights.
Lisa Small has asked this question of were these weights used prior to the 19th century to trade gold with Europeans, and are any dated from that period that would have ended up in European collections? I mean, there's absolutely, there's archaeological and written evidence that, the copper alloy casting practice goes back to the 15th century in this region. So there was, a trade in, there was a use of copper alloy going back centuries, and absolutely, gold had been the financial standard for, again, centuries in this area. So they were absolutely using, Ghanaians were using gold weights to weigh gold prior to the arrival of Europeans, and then through that period. And, it was really only down to the British ending that, really. So, those are certainly in collections. There are some in Europe where we have information that those collections were created during the pre-colonial or early colonial period. So they can date to easily the 19th century. I don't know if we have any going back to the 18th century that I've seen. But
I don't know back exactly that far, but there is a collection in the museum in Leiden that is 1874. So that's really before that British change. And it would be really amazing to include that group of weights in our study to see if there are any distinct changes over time. In addition, we've also been adding some more contemporary made ones to see if there's any elements that have been added that we can distinctly separate out more contemporary weights. We've got a lot of people in the chat, I don't know which one to mark, but asking if we really can date or locate these weights. And I will say, tune back in a while. Analyzing this data is a real effort, and it takes a lot of time and patience, not just in, we had to collect the data using the XRF, but then it had to be like the data has to be cleaned up in certain ways before you can conduct statistical analysis on it. And then, there's just so many factors in analyzing the data. So stay tuned. Maybe we will have an answer for you. Maybe this was a practice in how we know what we don't know, but we'll see. But no, for all the people who are asking in the chat, if we can correlate alloys with location or date, I think the answer right now is not yet.
And to the same sort of style of question, we're getting a lot of questions that have to do with, and can we really not find a very clear measurement system within these weights? And, again, not yet. We're not seeing any clear pattern emerge, because we have looked at the metallic content, we have looked at the actual weight, and it doesn't necessarily look like there is, very obvious groupings within this, that all of these weights are falling into, clearly spaced out weights, masses. And so what we're trying to figure out now using the provenance and using the metallic content is, okay, is that because we have souvenir weights that are mixed in with actually used weights, and that's why it's sort of hampering our ability to see those clear weight systems, which seems likely. But figuring out how to separate those out is really what all of this working with the data is that's the point, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are quite a few historical documents that do talk about, there are these certain standards that are across the region that the historians have been able to piece together. But what we're really looking for, and what I think our study will contribute to these conversations, is we have these historical sources, right? And they're exactly talking about what the measurement system is. And we're trying to see if those match up to objects in a distinct material way, rather than just saying that one looks like it's from the 15th century, but we don't have any evidence that exactly connects it to the 15th century, or that one looks 17th century and it feels like it looks like it's been worn, so it's probably pretty old. We're trying to say concretely, can we, yes or no, date these objects back to when they're proposed to be, and like match them up to those historical records and kind of close the gap. And so that's what we're trying to do with this research. And so far we haven't been able to affirm or confirm or deny any of these historical claims. Eric, I'm not doing it. I'm not moderating this chat.
No, I mean, we're both trying to keep up with the chat. There are a lot
Great
of questions coming
though.
in. Yeah, really great questions. And R.A. Schweitzer asked a question that's sort of on the other side of the, we're talking about the copper alloy weights, but they've asked, where did the gold come from? And I think that's a great point, that these are part of a system where there is a whole other metallic content being the gold. And so the gold was actually coming from, this was local to Ghana. Ghana is an incredible source of gold mining. This is one of the reasons that it was so attractive to colonial powers, that this was a big part of the trade, that they were acquiring gold from Ghana. And so that is also why it was the foundation of the currency. So that was all.
There was a great exhibition on that a few years ago, Caravans of Gold, if anyone's interested. They had a publication that went with it as well. So I invite you to check that out.
It's like over my shoulder.
Oh yeah.
And also there was the exhibition, Roz Walker's exhibition at Dallas, also on Ghanaian gold. There's a lot of incredible gold artwork from Ghana that, is part of this whole complex of metallurgical arts as well.
Mm-hmm.
Amy Clark has asked whether the gold weights have been exhibited in the past at the Fowler. And I like this question because I think it sort of, I mean, it gets to something that I think Carly and I have found throughout the course of this research, is that we tell many of our colleagues that we are very deep into researching gold weights. And I think that the common response tends to be, why? Because they are, again, so humble and so ubiquitous. You know, they're everywhere, and they're so small, and there's not, it's so, I mean, as we have found, it is very hard to be able to say something concrete about them. And so for that reason, I think most museums show them just sort of, here's a selection of a handful of gold weights. They represent a larger complex of material culture from Ghana, and that's sort of the extent of how they're shown. In my time at the Fowler, we haven't shown them up until now, and I can't remember them being shown previously. I would be shocked if a few of them hadn't been shown at some point. I mean, I know that they were shown in our exhibitions on Ghanaian arts in the 1970s, but they are not in our permanent collection gallery. So this is sort of an especially nice moment to sort of bring out, I think, 16 that are in Particular Histories, including one that I will just say anyone who comes to the show, I think that we all kind of get excited about, because, again, we talk about these gold weights as copper alloy, but there is one that's in the exhibition that actually still has flecks of gold embedded into the incised decoration on it. So you see that it's that physical trace of it being part of the gold trade. It was probably stored in the same bag that someone had put some gold in. So there's that really sort of nice sort of moment there in the exhibition. But I don't know, keep an eye out for that when you come to visit.
Yeah, and major kudos to our designer who helped. These objects, like Erica said, they're really hard to show because they're so small. And I know, at least when I'm giving tours, it's always, come look with me, and we want to get close. And now during time of COVID, it's hard to get close, but we really want to invite people to look deeply at the objects and to see all the details. And it's hard to do that when you have something that's so small. But I think in the way we have them arranged, we've got examples of the different considerations the questions we're considering with the objects. We've got them arranged by size. We've got a selection that show all the different colors, one section that shows the additions and the modifications, and then this really spectacular one that Erica mentioned with the gold in it. And so we've kind of displayed them in a way that walks you through our research process while also still giving you something that's very clear to compare to. So we'll see. I think displaying small things is a real challenge for museums, but I hope that we've put them up in a way that you can understand together. All right.
My goodness, I feel like the Q&A has sort of gotten away from me. I think we have time for maybe one last question. Carly, are there any that are jumping out at you that you want to?
I also lost complete control of the chat. I'm sorry, everyone in the public. I'm like too into gold weights. I want to talk to Erica about the gold weights, and I just lost the chat. We've got a nice context here about them being used in the region. So from Vicky here, were weights used in Togo and West African countries? And I think that's an important question to ask, that we do have some stone weights. They're not even copper alloy weights used to measure gold, but they're stone weights used to measure gold that we think are from northern Mali. And so that shows the extent of this gold trade across the Sahara was really teased out in those exhibitions. But they were used in the gold trade was really regional. It's not confined to these colonial borders. And so it was very regional, and we do see them really spread out. But the majority of the weights that we have are pretty, although there is a lot of variation in them, they do look pretty stylistically similar, but they're all from that West Africa region.
And Carly, I don't know about you, there have been a couple questions in here that make me want to think about these questions for further research, in terms of someone's asking whether there's influences from the gold weights in jewelry that's being made in this area. And someone else was asking whether there are any connections between the geometric patterns and the Adinkra symbols that are a well-known Ghanaian pattern system. And I mean, I think those are great questions that we don't have answers to, but I think are, you know, other ways to complicate and maybe look for ways to date, or maybe see the impact of these, you know, once they enter the souvenir trade, maybe this actually becomes a language that then infiltrates these kinds of decorative elements more. I don't know, but something to look into for us. And you're giving us more research to do, which
We can study
thank you.
gold weights the rest of our lives.
So I think, you know, I think that sort of wraps it up for us. Am I right, Carly?
Yeah, thanks everyone for going on this research journey with us. We appreciate you sticking with us, even though we don't have a lot of concrete answers yet, but it's really exciting to share what we've been working on. We've been doing this gold weight research since really the pandemic hit. And so it's nice to finally get it out there.
Indeed.
Thank you, Carly and Erica. I will mention our next program, Friday, September 23rd, is an exhibition walkthrough in person with the exhibition curator, Carly Forbes. That'll be a lunchtime walkthrough, 12:30, Friday, September 23rd. Don't miss learning more from Carly Forbes. I will say thank you so much for attending. Thank you to my Fowler colleagues for sharing your research today. It's been eye-opening to learn about these gorgeous gold weights and see how they're being cared for at the Fowler. Stop by soon at the Fowler to learn more about provenance and African art. The exhibition Particular Histories, Provenance Research and African Arts is on view through November 13th. Thank you to everyone who joined us. This program has been recorded and will be available immediately on our Facebook, and in a few days it will be uploaded to the Fowler website for you to revisit and share. Thank you so much.